There you go. Perfect. So welcome back. I'm hoping everyone watching it as well after the summer break. And we pick up, we're going a little off topic. Usually we do the weekly Torah portion, the parasha, and find a lesson or a theme from there to springboard into the conversation. But today, and the next 2 weeks as well, we're going to be focusing on the high holidays. So we're already deep into the season, even though it hasn't yet begun. Because the month before Rosh Hashanah, the month of Elul, is already the pre-game for the high holidays, for Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. Elul is sort of a month boot camp to get us ready, to get us in the right zone for the experience of Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur. And there's a classic Jewish phrase that is not just Jewish, but the more you prepare for something, the more you get out of it. So especially something which is spiritual, holy, a little beyond our regular experience, if you want to go there, if you want to have that experience, you have to be ready. Right? You go to Israel, for example, and you can go to the Western Wall, to the Kotel, and some people walk in there. It's a wall. It's nice. It looks really beautiful. There's no excitement. They don't feel moved by the experience. It was a nice thing to check off their tourist bucket list. Other people go to the Kotel and are deeply moved by the history, moved by the spiritual feeling that overtakes them, and they have a really transcendent experience. Just being in the presence of the Western Wall, being where the temple once stood, being where so many Jews have prayed and continue to pray, and that they walk away changed people. Both of these people went to the same wall. Both of them did the same thing. Why was one moved while the other wasn't? Now, often it comes down to how much mental preparation the person had. If I'm just come there without thinking about it, I see a wall. But if I'm aware of the history, if I've spent time thinking about the meaning of this site, if I've spent time preparing myself mentally to experience what's on offer there, then I can tap into, then I can be available to feel and to be a part of what's happening. So for me to have that experience, I have to prepare myself. And the same thing, exactly the same thing, is the high holidays. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur are incredibly moving and spiritually charged days. The practices, the prayers, the whole experience is designed to move us. It's designed to give us a life-changing, a transformational experience. But for a lot of people, even those that celebrate Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, there are days in the calendar with their schedule. I go to the synagogue, I have my prayer service, I hear the Shofar, I fast, I have a breakfast. So even if I'm celebrating them, they're not changing me as a person. They're nice. I'm talking about someone who's actually taking it seriously, right? But they haven't really got into the experience of Rosh Hashanah. They haven't really developed a taste for Yom Kippur. So it hasn't made its mark on them. But if we're aware of what's going on these days, if we're aware of what's possible, of what the themes that are resonating over the 10 days of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, then when we get there, we can actually have that experience. We're mentally present to be able to be susceptible to what the days have to offer. And so over the next few weeks, we're going to look at a few of the themes of Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur, the themes that we may be familiar with somewhat, but look at them from a bit of a deeper perspective and try to be more familiar, be more comfortable, and understand better what's going on these days. What's really Rosh Hashanah about? what's Yom Kippur really about? And the better we understand what they're about, and we appreciate how it's expressed in the practices of those days, when we actually go about those practices, they'll be much more meaningful to us. We'll be in that zone, we'll be there. So we're trying to arrive at Rosh Hashanah Yom Kippur not only on the calendar, so we've been, calendar forces you places. Time pushes us all forward. Minute by minute, day by day, we have no choice. We can't remain in the present. So it's this forced progress. But we want to arrive at Rosh Hashanah that we actually progress there. Not that time pushed us there, but we're actually there as well. And that takes progress in here and in here, in our minds and our hearts. Tonight, we're going to start with the most classic symbol of Rosh Hashanah. What is the most fundamental practice of Rosh Hashanah? Shofar. Exactly. So a lot of the practices associated with Rosh Hashanah are not intrinsic or not biblically, don't originate in Torah and are later developments. For example, dipping the apple in the honey, a very important custom, and a widely practiced custom. You won't find it anywhere in Torah. You won't find it, it's a custom. Customs are incredibly important, and Judaism places a lot of emphasis on tradition and on customs, but it can't be a defining feature of Rosh Hashanah because it wasn't always there. The defining feature of Rosh Hashanah is the shofar. Even the idea that Rosh Hashanah is a day of judgment, we don't find in the Torah. In the Torah, it's never called Day of Judgment. It's called Day of Yom HaZikaron, Day of Remembrance, when God remembers. It's called Yom Teruah, the day of the sounding of the shofar. So the shofar is the highlight of Rosh Hashanah, the defining feature. And what we're going to explore is, how does shofar express the key theme of Rosh Hashanah? If Rosh Hashanah is defined by shofar, then whatever Rosh Hashanah is about, somehow shofar does that. So what is the shofar? We blow a ram's horn, right? It's a musical instrument. It's a very simple musical instrument. There's no notes. There's no two ways about it. You blow, sound comes out. Why? Why are we commanded to blow a shofar? Any ideas? I can explain to you Shabbos. God created the world in 6 days. He rests in the seventh. So we rest in the seventh. I can explain a lot of mitzvahs to you. But here we're commanded on one of the holy days of the year, go get a horn of a ram, hollow it out so we can make it into an instrument, in the synagogue, when everyone's there and the whole community, Jews are coming from all over out of the woodwork, and stand on the stage and blow this ram's horn. What's going on?
Well, it's like we're resonating the sound to Hashem on this big event of Rosh Hashanah.
Okay, so what does that mean to resonate the sound to Hashem?
It's like a giving of your sound and soul as much as you can. So we're loud.
We're projecting ourselves.
Right, projecting. Yeah.
Okay, that's a nice idea, and it's not wrong. I'll tell you what I would take issue with it a little bit. There's a law that says the main part of the prayer is the Amidah, the silent service. In the silent service, you're not meant to read aloud. And even when you read aloud, you shouldn't scream it. And the reason is, if you scream your prayers, you're actually, in a subtle way, being blasphemous. You're saying, God isn't here. God's somewhere far away that I have to scream for him to hear me. So, saying I need to amplify my voice for God to hear us is sort of saying, well, God is somewhere distant, that I have to get my voice to reach there. I can whisper and God will hear me too. So it's we have to explore that further. What would it mean to amplify our voice? Why would we need to?
Well, I mean, it's a ram's horn, so it's animal, and it's like we're always trying to reconcile or to raise our animal nature. It's a daily struggle, Benoni, right? Well, that's the conduit that is used to ascend. It's basically a deep cry from our animal nature, and using the ram's horn, that is going to be the vehicle that allows us to ascend.
Okay. So you're saying the symbolism here that we're taking a part of an animal and using it to express ourselves, to symbolize that we have an animal inside of us. There's a part of us which isn't refined yet, but that is where the deep cry to God comes from.
That's the deep bond. That's
okay.
The animal brings us there.
Okay.
And the sound is a cry too. It's like you mentioned, prayer. Prayers are articulations, words. This is just beyond that. This is the deepest yearning to return or to.
So it's a simple sound. There's nothing articulated, no words. It's just a pure expression of self.
Nothing superfluous. It's
okay.
It's like the original word. First there was the word.
Similar, yeah.
Vibration.
Yes.
And then he created everything from that. It's like the whole new year is created from the sound.
Okay. Take one step further. That we're heralding a new year. A new year is God creating the world anew. To a certain degree, there's a new energy descending into the world. It's like a recreation. The world looks the same. We don't notice the difference. But on the back end of the system, there's a new energy animating the world. And God's energy is likened to a vibration. That God spoke the world into existence. Just like when we speak, we create sound waves. So God's speech created existence. So it all started off with noise, with vibrations. And so we also, I think is what you're saying, we mimic that process. We make a sound coming from our expression. That's going to, have its effect that God should make his sound and bring the world into existence for another year. That's what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. All very valid responses. And in fact, there are many different explanations given in Jewish literature. Rabbi Sadia Gaon was one of the great early Jewish thinkers. He compiled a list of different reasons for the shofar. I think it's 12 reasons, if I'm not mistaken, that he compiled. But what is often the case in Jewish literature is when there's many answers for a question, it usually means the question has no good answer, right? If there was a straightforward answer, everyone would agree on what it is. When you have 10 different rabbis giving different reasons for something, it means there's no clear reason, right? So because we have so many different explanations for shofar, means there's something at the heart of shofar that is not understood, is not simple, straightforward. So what I want to do is go into the history of shofar. The history of the shofar, and from there we'll see its meaning, and we'll see how profound the practice of the shofar is, and how it fits into the whole Rosh Hashanah business. The shofar begins at the binding of Isaac, the Akedah. Abraham is instructed by God, take your son Yitzchak and bring him as an offering on the altar. And as a loyal servant of God, Abraham says, okay, without missing a beat. And he takes his son Yitzchak on a journey towards an unknown destination. He's following God, and he finally reaches Mount Moriah, which is later to become Temple Mount. And God said, this is the place. He builds an altar. He's about to sacrifice his son Yitzchak. He had waited 90 years, 99 years until he finally had this son. In the last minute, an angel says, this is all a test. Just a game. You really never meant to kill your son. God doesn't believe in human sacrifice. And Abraham, what do you think his reaction would be? Put yourself for a moment in Abraham's shoes. Okay? You've traveled all this way, knowing in your mind you're about to kill your son. Obviously, he's accepted this, right? He hasn't turned around. And we can assume that he's not only accepted this, but he's eager to do this. This is God's will. That's the sort of the feeling we get about Abraham. He's going down to the wire. And then God says, hold off. I was joking. What do you think he's feeling in that moment?
Bless the name.
Sorry?
Bless
the name. Relief.
Yeah.
Okay.
If he received word to kill his son and committed himself without skipping a beat, I would imagine he would have a similar transition when he was told not to kill his son.
Okay, good point. If he's a loyal servant, yes, no, yes, it's irrelevant. Whatever God says. Okay. Or, a lot of people think have relief. For you don't have to go through with this. What's he going to tell Sarah, He didn't tell her he was leaving with Yitzchak to kill him. He's going to come back home without a son. That she, when she's 90 years old, finally had a child. She finds out her husband killed the kid. That wouldn't go down so well for their marriage. Right? But I think Abraham, and the text says, Abraham actually felt very disappointed. And I'll tell you why. Put yourself in his shoes. Imagine you sacrificed a lot for someone. You made yourself very vulnerable. You went out of your comfort zone to do something for someone you love, right? So you really sacrificed a lot and went beyond your comfort. And they tell you whatever you're offering them, whatever that self that you offer them, that you stripped away layers, that raw self, they reject you. They say, I don't even want that. I never wanted it. Right? So Abraham here has put himself aside. He has taken one of the most difficult decisions and said, I'm going to go ahead with this. Everything that I want in life, everything that I feel for, this goes against that. Every fiber of my existence, this is going against. But I'm going to do that for God. So I'm really digging deep. I'm really stripping myself of any ego, of any self. All putting myself out there for the other, for God. And I'm getting myself into trouble. What are people going to say about, I'm trying to spread a message of God in the world. I'm going to say, this guy killed his son on a mountaintop. What's my wife going to say? What's going to be with my future generation descendants that I was promised by God? I'm putting it all aside. I'm making myself so uncomfortable. All for God. And then the last minute God says, you know what? I don't want your sacrifices. I don't want your whatever you're offering me. It hurts, right? I want to give something. I went there. Now you're telling me you have a nice day. So he was disappointed. And so we're told that immediately, suddenly he sees a ram in the bushes, stuck in the thorns. Wasn't there before. It appeared there suddenly. And that now he can bring as an offering in place of his son Yitzchak. So he has some sort of consolation. Don't bring your son, but here's something else you can offer to God. The Midrash says something fascinating. The ram has two horns. It says the two horns of that ram are both to become shofars, to be played at vital points of history. two points of history that are transformational, two times that there's a overwhelming experience in the world, those shofars play a part. The first is Matan Torah, the giving of the Torah at Sinai, the revelation. There's a shofar blast. The Jews heard a loud sound of a shofar. I don't know who blew it. God blew it. That was one of the horns of the ram. The second horn of the ram is a blast. We're told, the prophet says that Mashiach will come, when the world will reach an era of perfection. There'll be peace, there'll be harmony, there'll be a world of divine recognition. God will be present in the world. That also will be heralded with the blowing of the shofar. What's going on here? Why are these shofars coming out of this story of Abraham? Now, obviously, I don't think God blew an actual shofar. Maybe he did. I don't know. It means that God would blow an actual horn. Obviously, something deeper being told by the Midrash here. And what's the story all about in the first place? How is Abraham consoled from his disappointment in not sacrificing his son by offering a ram on the altar? How does that at all fill a void that was left by God telling him you don't have to sacrifice your son?
There are a lot of, there's some, if you look in Abraham's past, there's some inconsistencies. Because prior to this, he argues with God, with Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And he actually wants to spare. Like, why do you want to take everybody out? Not everybody's evil, right? But he doesn't feel the will or have the volition to argue for his son. like
that's a good point.
In
yes.
the past, he argues, "Hey, wait a second, you're gonna wipe out all those people? But now, hey, you want to take my son? Okay." So it's sort of reverse ego. It's sort of, in a way, true equanimity, like you said, doesn't matter. The seas are calm, you're the same. The seas are rough, you sail anything. The fact that the stakes were much more higher because this was his son, whereas Sodom and Gomorrah, he knew some people, he didn't know some people. Distant relatives, not distant, right? But he had a lot to say to spare them and to debate and argue with God. But here, take my son. Wait, I can really beat a big guy right now. I'm going to abide by it. So it's sort of, from his past, it's like the more that's asked of him, its ego is indulging it more. So the possibility is that Hashem did this to say, listen, you have an ego. We're putting it in check. You're sacrificing a lamb because right now you're sacrificing your animal nature. Deep down in this insidious, wondrous self of Abraham is a very prideful person with a huge ego that is so hidden, we're going to expose it by asking you to find your son.
Okay, interesting reading.
Yeah.
Interesting reading. I want to offer another reading. You have permission, Pete.
Of course. I was just blowing the shofar, that's it.
Blowing the shofar.
There's a tapeworm playing.
Tapeworm. There you go.
Oh, that was good.
So here's one idea. The shofar is narrow on the blowing end and gets wider on top. And what this symbolizes is, we say a verse, we say this verse throughout the 10 days, Rosh Hashanah through Yom Kippur. It comes from chapter 130 in Psalms. Mima'amakim kirasicha Hashem. From the depths, I call out to you, God. And the commentaries explain this narrowness of the shofar is a call from the narrowness inside ourselves, the depths, from a place of a very deep place that expands, that allows you to be expansive. When you feel restrictiveness, you call out, and that opens the horizons that allows you an expansion. So the shofar, the body of the shofar, is actually mirrors the blasts of the shofar, the cry of the shofar. The Baal Shem Tov says a beautiful story. He says, what's the shofar about? He says that the prince, the king sends a prince who has pampered his whole life in the palace. He wants to see what it's really made out of. He says, you know what? Here's $100. Go to a faraway land for a year. Live life on your own. Feel what it's like not to be taken care of. And then come back after a year, I'll pamper you again. You'll be back a prince, but at least experience real life. The son goes to faraway land, and in the beginning he's still a prince, and before he knows it, though, he becomes acclimated to what's going on there. He loses the $100. He has to become part of their culture, make money, and he forgets life is like, and he gets very assimilated, and he's poor, and he's doesn't have any more the self-respect of a prince, and he has tattered clothes, and he begins to adopt whatever a pauper in that place, the life. A year goes by, he forgot about his father, forgot about the palace, and he is slowly but surely disintegrating into that society. And he came to a point where he's so far gone, he can't continue life, and he remembers, hey, I have a bailout. I can go back to my father in the palace. He remembers. So he makes the long trek back to the palace. And you can imagine his straggled hair, dirty, tattered clothes. He speaks a different dialect now. His language is different. He's a different person. And he comes to the palace. He finally reaches the gates of the palace, hopeful after such a treacherous journey, such a difficult life that he's gotten into. And his last hope, he gets there and he says, oh, I finally made it. And he starts walking in. The guards stop him. Who are you? Approaching the palace. Who am I? I'm the prince. You're the prince. He's arguing with them. He can't even speak the language. He doesn't remember anything about the palace. He doesn't look anything close to what the prince looked like. And he's dejected. He's so frustrated. His hopes have been dashed. Every ounce of his strength is sapped. He sits down in front of the palace and starts to cry. And the king hears from the window a cry that he recognizes. Just a scream. He says, that's my son. And he gets into the palace, and he's entered the palace and embraced by the king. The Baal Shem Tov said, we're that prince. Our souls are put into this world, and God says, you, a soul, a pure soul, I want you to live life for a bit, experience, and expecting us to withstand the challenges, the temptations of this world. For most of us, we get very caught up in this world, caught up in the rat race of life, caught up chasing our own base desires, caught up struggling with things that we'd rather not struggle with, and we lose track of who we are. We don't even remember that we're a soul. We don't speak that language anymore. It doesn't talk to us. We don't know the words. We don't know how to communicate with God. That whole environment is distant from us. We're so caught up, we're so bogged down by this world, we have become part of the world as opposed to being something different, something unique, something higher beyond. And we come to the high holidays, to Rosh Hashanah, and we want to turn back to God. So one day you are reminded, okay, we're coming back to the palace. God, yes, we've strayed throughout the year. We've gone in all kinds of directions. We've lost our way. We're not true to ourselves. We're living a life which is foreign, but we're coming back home. We come to the synagogue. We realize we don't know the language. Maybe we can read the prayers, but I'm reading the prayers. They're the prayers that someone else wrote that I'm reading. It's not me. We don't know how to express ourselves. We don't know really how to articulate ourselves to God. It's something foreign to us. We're so human, we're so worldly that we can't transcend. And so the call of the shofar is a simple cry from the depths of our heart. There's no words to this. but because it's so pure, so real, that is us. God, oh, my children. You know, they say a joke of a guy lived a pious life at tzaddik. Everything, ever did the right things. One day he decides, you know what? I want to see what it's like to be, you know, on the other side. So he takes off his yarmulke, tzitzis, dresses like, you know, a gangster. Says, one day, let me try it out. It's Shabbos. He says, you know what? Forget it. I'm not keeping Shabbos today. Gets into his car, parks the car, all proud of himself. Look at me. Gets out of the car,